So, the man you're about to hear speak tonight startup, help bring it to significant value, multiple millions of dollars. And now, after that journey, which you'll hear about, he is, anybody heard of the Booth Business School, Chicago, University of Chicago? That's where he's studying now, doing his MBA, right? And now he is a columnist and does articles for magazines like Inc. Magazine, Forbes, interviewed by CNN, lots of media. Why? Because he's decided not to let his youth get in the way of where he wants to go professionally. And he's going to teach you some of the secrets of doing the exact same thing tonight. And if you do what he says, not just make a note and say, oh, I've decided to do it, but if tomorrow you go out and actually do what he says, it'll transform your life. I promise you. I promise it will transform your life.
Hey. Thank you. All right. Go for it. So, Professor, thank you so much for the generous introduction. Obviously, not a lot of pressure here after that. So, okay. So, I just kind of want to get to know everyone a little bit here. Who wants to start a business after they graduate from Cal State Fullerton? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 people. Okay, so let me ask that gentleman. Like, what do you want to do?
Probably not right after graduation, but maybe like in a few years when I'm ready without enough capital, I might start doing something.
Okay, so you haven't formed an idea yet, but you want to start a business someday? Okay, cool. Who knows what they want to do after they graduate from school? Kind of, you, not sure, maybe, kind of, getting there? Over there, what do you want to do?
Me?
Yeah.
Work for a public accounting firm.
Okay, is that your dream job?
Dream job?
Mm-hmm.
Not at all.
No, it's a nice little safety net? Okay, cool. Well, I mean, we all need to start somewhere, right? Okay, so I've been fortunate enough to be an entrepreneur. I also have corporate experience, and I realized there's just one skill that you really need to become successful. Just one single skill. And I'm going to teach you guys a secret in just a second. But it's really interesting because if you just have this entrepreneurial mindset, whether you're trying to break into an industry, try to land your dream job, or even start a business, it's just this one particular skill that you need. So we're going to jump into that in just a second. Do I need a clicker for this? Or? Okay. But if you really want to know, buy my book. But today, since we only have a couple hours, I'm going to share with you guys a few stories. So before we jump in, I'm going to share with you guys a little bit about myself. Cool. So I guess that's me. So when I first started my career, I guess it started when I was 18. I moved from Korea at the age of 16, and that was after I briefly lived in Minnesota. So I know it's really difficult to imagine, but at that time, my English was really choppy. Like I had this really funny Minnesota fob, like Korean fob accent thing going on. And I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but I'm like really dark skinned for Korean. So everyone was like, dude, where are you from? You don't really like look like you're Korean. So I had a lot of trouble just blending in with everyone. But what was interesting was that when I went to college, and the college I went to was UC Riverside, I didn't have a lot of interest in school. My parents wanted me to become a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. And I'm like, Mom, Dad, I mean, I know you guys want an American education, but I wanted to pursue the American dream. And to me, those were two different things. My dad had a PhD. He went to a really good school in the States as well as Korea. And I really didn't want to follow that path. So at 18, I dropped out of college for a brief moment, joined a network marketing business. Are you guys familiar with network marketing by any chance? Amway? No? Okay, so it's a really funny business where you sign up your friend, and your friend has to pay $400 to join your business, and they sell products, and then they have to recruit more people. So it's a sales business, but it's not really a sustainable sales model. Yes? Yes. So I guess like the unofficial name is a pyramid scheme, but the official name is called network marketing. So it turned out I was really good at it because I think it was because I moved so much back and forth between Minnesota and Korea as a kid. I knew I had a disadvantage speaking English, but I was like, screw it, I'm just going to own it, right? Whether my English is broken or choppy or whatever, I'm just going to stand up straight and just explain the product. Quite quickly, I was starting to make about $10,000 a month, so I decided to just drop out of college. So that was my first experience, I guess, kind of as an entrepreneur. My second experience was I tried to launch a hedge fund when I was 23. And this was really interesting because after I went back to school, and I went back to school because my parents really wanted to finish college because my parents and I have this relationship where they wanted me to, where they came from Korea for me to get an American education, and I really didn't want to do that. So I thought, okay, that's the least I could do. So when I went back to school, I got really into poker, and I guess it was because I was good at sales. I was playing tournaments, made a couple $1,000s. Then I started playing high stakes, lost it all one night. Really sucked. And then I realized, well, if I'm good at poker, I should, in theory, be really good at trading in the stock market. So I finally started to study like my 4th year in college. Like I never really had more A's and B's in my whole entire life, now that I think about it. But for the first time, my GPA was above a 3.5. So I had a 3.61 quarter. I'm like, wow, this is great. I know something now. And then the next quarter, I think I got a 3.7. And then I made it to the chancellor's list because it was above a 3.5 the whole entire year. And when I realized I actually could build a future upon what I was learning at school, I was able to, I'll get to this story in a second, but I was able to land a job at Merrill Lynch, and then that segued into becoming a trader for E-Trade Financial, and this was during the Great Recession. So I was able to convince one of my clients to launch a hedge fund. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, and it failed miserably. So we'll get to that in a second, too. And my third story was after my hedge fund actually had failed, I decided to move back to California, and I started trading in my personal account, live with mom and dad. It was kind of humiliating because I talked really big. I said I was going to become this trader in New York. Didn't work out. I came back like a dog with his tail between his legs. And I saved enough money to launch a company called Dealflicks, and we raised about $4.5 million. We got up to a $15 million valuation. And again, I was able to do this with just one particular skill. And this is kind of interesting. At the age of 31, after building the company to a multi-million-dollar valuation, I was actually ousted from my own company. And this was actually a really fascinating experience because by the time I was 31, I actually built such a strong brand that when I was ousted by my company, I was recruited by multiple firms to run their companies. So I was fortunate enough to land a job as the chief sales officer for a subsidiary of a publicly traded company. So I ended up overseeing 40 people, and it was for a company called the Vista Group. They were the largest point-of-sale provider for movie theaters in the movie industry. So it was a very fascinating turnaround how my brand was able to build off of this one particular skill. And at 33, I pretty much survived everything to tell the tale. And I decided to write a book. And this was actually something that I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to write a book. But getting fired from your own startup is really tough. Like in my case, I put my blood, sweat, and tears to it for about 4 or 5 years. It was very tough to really get it to that valuation. And instead of being disappointed about what had happened, what I decided to do was channel that energy, and I wanted to help others who had kind of a similar background such as myself. And going back to when I first moved back to the States, I actually started a journal back then. And I knew at that time, if I wanted to become really successful in America, I really had to become an American first before I became a businessman. And that was my motto. So when I wrote these journals, when I was about 17, I used to write them in first person, second person, and third person, even sometimes writing as if I were my clients, sometimes as if I were my friends, to not just understand American, to speak like an American, think like an American, but to also think what they're thinking on an ongoing basis, so I could have an advantage when it came to sales or management or leadership and what have you. And I was fortunate enough to have some of my articles published on CNBC, Forbes, and Inc. And recently, my book became a bestseller. So I'm really excited to present to you guys some of the skills I've learned throughout my career. So as I was writing my book, I wanted to really understand how can I help those with disadvantages. So in my case, my English wasn't that great. I had parents that were immigrants, and I realized I had to pretty much teach everything myself. So because I didn't have parents who really understood American culture, I started to become really creative and started to learn how to open doors to really break into particular industries. And that was one of the questions that I really wanted to answer. And there are some other questions I wanted to answer, such as, how do you break into particular industries when you don't have a strong academic background? So in my case, I graduated from UC Riverside, and oftentimes companies such as like Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley in finance, they don't recruit from UC Riverside. They generally, back then about 10 years ago, they only recruited from Berkeley, UCLA, USC. So I wanted to write a story about how can you almost flip your weaknesses into strengths? How do you market yourself differently? And I realized that sometimes when people underestimate you, there's a huge advantage that you can actually cultivate from that. Those are the questions that I wanted to answer. And lastly, if there is a way to build a business, if you don't have the financial resources, how can you get access to the people that could provide the funding for your business? How do you actually create a buzz around the product so you get those people's attention? So those are some of the questions that I wanted to answer. So this is, so that's, instead of being, so basically that's the book I wrote. Instead of being upset about getting ousted, I started to write, and that's what I did. And I realized at the age of 32, I worked in Wall Street, I worked in Hollywood, and I also worked in Silicon Valley. So, throughout my whole entire experience, I realized that there's a common thread when you're trying to break into an industry and try to build your career. And as you guys will see in just a second, I'm going to share with you guys 3 stories that really paint this picture. Okay, so you guys ready? Yeah, that was an introduction. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how I broke into finance. So how many of you guys want to break into finance? First of all, what do you want to do? Trade stocks? Okay, trade stocks. Okay, anyone else?
Investment banking one day.
Investment banking one day. Okay, there you go. Okay, cool. So about 10 years ago, before everyone wanted to work at Google or Facebook or whatnot, before the market crashed, is everyone familiar with the Great Recession, kind of? Yes, obviously, right? So everyone wanted to work in finance at one point. They wanted to work at Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, or whatnot. And me coming from UC Riverside, I really wanted to work in investment banking too. And I had this phenomenal network marketing experience, but then I had no internship. So it's my senior year in college, and I'm down to my last quarter, and I just have a blank resume, and people look at this like Excel communication. Isn't this pyramid scam? So I actually interviewed for Enterprise Rent-A-Car as a sales associate, and I couldn't even make it to the second round. I got dinged. So I go to the Career Center, and I tell the career counselor, hey, I really want to work at these particular banks, and Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, you name it. And I ask her, why don't we have those companies come to our school? And she says, well, there's a phone book right there. You could start dialing. So for about 4 or 5 hours, I start dialing, I start emailing. I'm like, yeah, this is, I could probably get this to work, right? And I realized after a few hours, this is probably not going to work, right? So I go back home, and I'm trying to be creative here. How can I get in front of these people to get an internship? So I started Googling, which investment banks are close to my school. And lo and behold, there's a Merrill Lynch about 5 miles away. And it was actually a lot more intimidating than this when you look at it, when you have no real job experience. So then I went, so I decided to put on a suit. I did some research on Merrill Lynch, and I didn't know how to prepare for this. So I just studied the history of Merrill Lynch, their founders, and how the company got started, where it got started, a bunch of useless information that probably wouldn't really help me. So then I just pull up, I ring the bell. Was it a bell? I'm not sure if it was a bell. But I went up the stairs, and then I asked for a secretary, and then she goes, hey, how can I help you? And I just introduced myself. Hey, my name is Kevin. I'm graduating from UC Riverside in about a quarter. I really need an internship. And she says, great. We just had a meeting about hiring an intern. Let me bring in the HR lady in. So the HR lady looks at me, and she's like, oh, great. We're actually looking for an intern. Why don't you come back next week? So the following week, I go back to Merrill Lynch, almost the exact time, exact day. And then I have two VPs. They're asking me about, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do? And I'm thinking, man, I studied till like 3 in the morning last night just studying the history of Merrill Lynch. 10 minutes in, they said, hey, you got the job. You're the first intern from UC Riverside in 2 years to get an internship at Merrill Lynch. It was just so easy. And I realized all I really had to do was show up and ask, because no one does it. Everyone's too scared to just introduce themselves and just say, hey, I'm willing to work for you for free. And that's what an internship is, right? And no one did it. So instead of hoping and waiting and just submitting my application, and they probably have piles and piles of resumes, I just showed up at their door, and I got my first internship. A couple of years later, and I think you're going to really like the story, I wanted to get into investment banking. So that Merrill Lynch internship helped me land a job at E-Trade Financial as a retail trader, which was really fun because I was trading during the Great Recession. I wanted to break into investment banking. And again, the odds were stacked against me. I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't go to Stanford, Princeton. I didn't go to any of those schools. And my GPA wasn't that great. And I remembered how I got that internship at Merrill Lynch a couple years earlier. Now, this is about 2010, so the market was starting to get better. So I was thinking, OK, maybe I can finally get to investment banking and get that six-figure analyst income. This is going to be so exciting. So I started researching where these companies recruit from. I found out there's only certain schools that they recruit from in California. So there's USC, UCLA, Berkeley, Claremont McKenna, a couple others. And I decided, what if I just crashed these career fairs and pretend I was like a USC student or UCLA student and just introduce myself exactly how I did at Merrill Lynch. So I was like, OK, let's try USC, because I went to their library, and they have a nice library and stuff, so I felt really comfortable there. So I went to USC, and I was like, do I lie tell them I'm a USC student? What should I do here? But I'm like, I'm just going to own it, right? So I go in, and then I realized they didn't check student ID. And I was like, OK, this is pretty easy. So I walked around the career fair, and OK, I know what to do now. Second night, there's another investment banking, career fair, seminars, stuff like that. So I studied all the financial statements. And then at this time, everyone's balance sheets, financial stuff, all the cash, all the liquidity ratios and stuff like that, all these companies were basically illiquid because of the financial crisis. So I read all the footnotes. I looked at the 10Qs, the 10Ks, and stuff like that. And I just memorized the worst parts of their financial statements. So now I'm sitting, and just kind of like you guys, I intentionally sit in the middle of the classroom, where everyone can see me. And then once the VP started presenting how awesome their company is and why they should work at Goldman Sachs, I start telling them your current ratio is off. How are you going to be sustainable? Why would we work for your company when you might go belly up in 6 months? So the VPs are starting to defend themselves. No, it's not as bad as you think. So I created this scene where everyone knew who I was. So yeah, I was basically heckling. So after the seminar, all the analysts and associates, they start walking up to me. They're like, who are you? Who are you? And I'm like, yeah, I don't go to this school. And then they're like, wait, so are you from Harvard or Stanford? No, I'm from UC Riverside. And they're just like, whoa, their mind was just so blown that I had the guts to just do something crazy like that. And the crazy part about that story was that the analysts and associates liked me so much, they started training me for my interview. They would call me, check in with me, like, hey, you know, we put you in the USC pool. We're down to 12 candidates. Berkeley's down to 12. UCLA's down to 11. You're probably going to get to second round. And I did. For, I don't know if I should say this on camera, but it's been 11 years or so now, so I will. So I was interviewing for now Citigroup, their mergers and acquisitions team in LA, and then for Merrill Lynch, their capital markets research team in New York City. So I had 2 companies that I made to the final round. And I was so excited. I was like, wow, this is just exactly like my Merrill Lynch situation where all I had to do is show up, own it, and ask. That's all I had to do. Now, this story doesn't really have a happy ending, actually. If it was that easy, that would be great, right? What ended up happening was they went back. So I guess, you know, my prediction was right. The hiring freezes came back, and no one got hired. So I didn't end up getting a job at any of those banks. But that gave me tremendous confidence, and it made me realize I can hang with the best of the best. And all I had to do was show up and ask and own it. Anyone can do a spreadsheet on Excel. It's not that hard. What an investment banking analyst does, it's not that hard. It's just predicting future cash flow. You discount it to present value, that kind of stuff. It's not that hard. But the fact that I could go out, you know, and present myself as, you know, a credible analyst and impress people made me realize, hey, all I have to do is just show up. And what was fascinating about the story was that I took the same mindset, whether it was working in entertainment, Silicon Valley, in finance, and now journalism and media. Like, I never forgot what I learned, and I took it all throughout 10 years of my career. The second story I want to share with you, oh, that's me during the seminars, basically. The second story I want to share with you guys is how I broke into tech. How many of you guys want to start a tech startup, by the way? Do you know how to code?
Yes. No.
Do you know how to code? Yes, no, getting there?
No.
Doing like HTML, CSS, it doesn't count. Gave up? Okay. So I have a confession to make. I didn't learn coding until my last quarter at University of Chicago. So I realized, and it's kind of funny because I've been a tech entrepreneur for like the last 7 years primarily. And when my friend first approached me and he said, hey, you know, I want you to join my startup. Like, you're like a really good sales guy. You should join my startup because all we need to do is get a programmer and then we could blow up. And my friend's idea was a company called Dealflicks. And what Dealflicks is, it's kind of like a price humble for movie deals. So back then, around 2012, you guys all remember Groupon and Living Social, right? Okay, so Groupon and Living Social was really big at that time. Anything discounted was kind of, you know, almost promised to blow up. So we decided to do kind of like a Groupon version, but for movie deals. So I joined the company. I'm like, hey, so what do I do? And he's like, well, the first thing we got to do is find a programmer because we don't have a website or an app. I'm like, okay. So I go back to the drawing board, and I do the exact same thing that I did at Merrill Lynch and the investment banking interviews. What did I do? I went to USC. And I looked for someone that looked like a programmer. And sometimes, I guess, stereotyping isn't, you know, the best sometimes, but it's sometimes really efficient. So I had a rule, if someone had a big backpack, thick glasses, there's a good chance that person is a programmer. So I started walking around campus, and anyone I see, I start showing them my, you know, presentation deck. And I'm like, hey, we're trying to do this, we're trying to build a startup, we're looking for a CTO. Within 2 weeks, I was able to get our first programmer, and we launched our beta product. And then after that, what was really exciting was that I used that same mindset to get us a lot of media attention. So one of the things that we were struggling with, because my partner and I, we didn't really know much about digital marketing, you know, search engine optimization or search engine marketing at that time, we were just handing out flyers. literally, that was our go-to marketing strategy. So we're handing out flyers at Staples Center. I think we handed out flyers at college campuses, at high schools and whatnot. And we were like, we got to really up our game. So what I decided to do was, okay, how do we get on the news, right? So I figured if we can get free PR, that's basically our own marketing arm, right? So people are basically doing marketing for us. Like, how do we do that? So I start calling up reporters and editors and whatnot, and I'm like telling them like, this is going to be the greatest company ever, and we're so excited. We're selling. What are you guys doing? Oh, we're selling discounted movie tickets. Click, click. No, it's not that exciting, right? But then I soon realized all these reporters and editors, they have deadlines. On the same time, almost every day, they'll say, hey, I got to go. I got a deadline to meet. I got a deadline to meet. Okay, what does that mean? He has a deadline, right? So I get a little bit smarter about this, right? So I'm thinking, okay, if Sally has a deadline on Wednesday, if I call her up on Tuesday and say something like, hey, Sally, your deadline's coming up tomorrow. I got a story for you. Then my odds are going to go up significantly. So within about a month of launch, using that same strategy, I was able to get us on the Santa Cruz Sentinel. And then the next one was like, wait, how do I make this even bigger? So at that time, we were trying to court a real, like, hardcore CTO. He's one of those guys that can get, a six-figure job at Google or Facebook or whatnot. And he was really hesitant about joining our startup. So, and we needed to sell movie tickets, and then we need to get theaters, and we need to get PR. So what I did was I told Zach, our soon-to-be CTO, I told him, hey, we're going to sign up a movie theater, and we're going to get on the news. And then I told the theater, hey, we're going to get a new website, and then we're going to get on the news. And I told the news outlet, we're going to get a new CTO, and we're going to get a new theater. So I had none of the above. Within 1 month, Zach joined our company as a CTO. We got a new theater in Oakland, and then we were on the Oakland Tribune for signing up that theater. 2 weeks later, we are on CNBC. So what did I just do, right? Are you guys familiar with arbitrage in finance, like market making? What is arbitrage?
Buying something at a certain price and selling it at a different price.
Right, and who does that?
Anyone.
Market makers, right? Yeah. So yeah, similar, but there's generally people who are able to price the market, and they kind of, it's kind of like if there's a pair of jeans in LA that's $5, you sell it in New York for $7, but you connect those two together, you're just exchanging value. So I had no connections in tech, I had no connections in PR, but then I was able to kind of merge those two together because they both had needs. Someone had a story to tell. Someone wanted to join a tech company, and the theater wanted to sell more movie tickets, right? So basically, in my book, I call this concept social arbitrage, where you don't really need connections to do something big. You just need to find out what someone needs. If you don't have it, and if someone else doesn't have it, find someone who does. Then you're just it's kind of like a borrowed ladder effect, and you can just continuously build off of that. Now, what's really fascinating about the movie industry is that all the relationships are formed like face-to-face, basically. A lot of business transactions are done within a certain circle. Everything is done, all the deals are done face-to-face. And after we signed up about 100 theaters, I realized 99 theaters signed up after some kind of face-to-face interaction. No one signed up after a cold email or a cold call. We hired ex-AMC executives. We hired ex-executives from Lionsgate, from Odell's Popcorn. They couldn't close any deals because all these relationships were passed down. They knew only how to play golf and have a few drinks and maintain relationships. They didn't know how to acquire new business. So my friends and I, or my business partners and I, we came up with this brilliant strategy. Again, another spin-off from my story, trying to get that internship at Merrill Lynch, an investment bank. And we decided to travel around the country to sign up every single movie theater. And when we first started this, it cost us an arm and a leg because we had to fly out, rent a car, and then book a hotel, fly back. Not only does this cost a lot of money, but it takes so much time and effort. So what do? We lived in a van for 2 years. So it's hard to imagine, but if you take out the middle seats of a Toyota Sienna, you can actually fit in a full-size mattress in there where 2 grown men, unless they're too big, can fit in. A funny story behind this. We actually had a job candidate we actually really loved, and he shows up to the office. He happens to be 6'9", and then he was literally begging us like, hey, I could have my feet out the window and all that stuff, but unfortunately it didn't work out. Anyways, so for 2 years we tried to visit almost every single theater across the country, door to door, face to face, wine and dine, steak and handshake, all that kind of stuff. We eventually signed up 750 movie theaters, and because we received unlimited PR attention, at this time we were covered by CNBC, New York Times, LA Times, The Verge, you name it. We were able to really build our business, get a lot of users, get a lot of funding, and whatnot. And it all came down from just showing up and asking movie theaters to sign up in person. And it was just literally the same concept I learned 7 or 8 years ago, trying to get that same internship at Merrill Lynch, just showing up. Crazy, right? Anybody excited here? Can't believe it, right? Any comment?
How?
What do you mean how?
I mean, that's so much manual labor. That's so much time, Like the efficiency isn't exactly there, but how did it work so well? How did you catch fire? How did you spread?
No, that's a great question. So first of all, we had 2 vans instead of 1. When the first van worked out, we were like, all right, we're going to double down on 2. And then we would drive to another city, and sometimes everyone would have their each van. So kind of like Transformers, we would split and then come back a few days later and then repackage and then drive to another city. And then it was that over and over and over and over and over again. And just kind of like that reporter story, we start to know the theater owner decision maker's schedule. So it's like, oh, this guy shows up Monday, 5 o'clock. All right, let's get him, And we would show up the same day, 5 o'clock, sign him up. And a lot of the times, when you're trying to purchase or when you're trying to sell something like a B2B product, the sales cycle could be extremely long. And it's not because they don't like your product, they don't like you. Sometimes it has nothing to do with that. It's just kind of like we hate paying our bills. Who loves paying your credit card bills? It's the same thing. You got to pay it, right? You got to pay that parking ticket, right? But imagine if someone shows up and just does all the, setting up the whole process for you, shows you how to log in, trains you for like 30 minutes, you're more likely to sign. And it just shortened our sales process significantly. So just by using that strategy, we were able to reduce our costs by about 1/3, but then also quadruple our theater acquisition rate. So instead of signing up, at one point we were signing up with a theater a day. So instead of signing up like 5 theaters a month, it started to become like 30 theaters a month. So it started to grow exponentially. Yeah, and this was when things started to get really fun because I realized the power of branding. And when you start, at first I was like really worried, and I was thinking, man, I don't think customers are going to take meetings with us anymore if they find out we live in a van. They're going to be like, you're kind of dirty here, I don't want to meet you, or you guys probably don't have any money. But what was so crazy was that people in the movie industry started to think, wow, if this guy is that hungry, like I should sign up. Like these guys are real serious. They're not just Silicon Valley kids who don't understand our industry. So we start to earn the respect in the movie space. And that's when I realized, wow, like PR really helps with branding, and it all comes back full circle, and then branding helps with fundraising, then you get more users. So we started to create this positive flow of building our business. So it was a really exciting time. Yeah. And these are some of the cool things that happened along. We were part of 500 startups. Is anyone familiar with 500 startups? No? Okay. They're kind of like one of the best venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. We got funding from Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank. Some funding from Warner Brothers, Turner Broadcasting. We were in a lot of media outlets. I know I only put it in New York Times, but We were also covered by China's Xinhua News. They're one of the biggest outlets in China. Korea Times, that was really exciting for my mom more than me. And then Germany's NPR radio station. So it was really funny. I was actually in London last year when I was applying to business school. I was looking into some of the schools over there. And I was sitting in one of the MBA sit-ins, and one of the classmates were like, dude, you're that van guy. So it was really cool to kind of be recognized outside the US. And that's when I realized, wow, branding is really awesome. So that's story number 2. And the last story is actually not a story about me. It's a story that I really wanted to share because I think it really paints the holistic picture of being able to break into any industry. Whether you're an entrepreneur trying to land that dream job, there's always a way if you look for a way. So let's call this character John, right? And John's a good friend of mine. His career, he's a few years older than me, so I kind of see a lot of parallels between what he did and I did. And John was kind of like this athlete guy, big. He played college football at University of Washington. And when he was playing college football, he got really close to some of the reporters and stuff like that. So he got an internship at a small local radio station over in Washington when he was going to school there. Once he graduated, he really wanted to break into entertainment. So he did the same thing. He flew out to LA, had a stack of resumes, got his suit, started doing the door-to-door thing. And then as he's staying at his friend's house, he says, hey, we should go to the Oscars. And he's from Seattle, so his friends looks at him like, dude, you can't just show up at the Oscars. You're a nobody. He's like, no, I'm going to go to the Oscars. I just want to see how it feels like. I'm going to try to see, or at least be close to the Oscars just to see how it's like, because I really want to work in entertainment. So what he does is that the day before, so the Oscars is actually not live. It's actually pre-recorded. So the day before the actual recording, he takes his rental car. He starts driving around the periphery. And he's just checking it out because he just wants to feel like how it's like. He parks his car. He starts walking around. He walks around and he sees like this yellow ticket. He just like picks it up, and it's like, oh wow, free parking pass, right? So that starts giving him ideas. Like maybe I could show up tomorrow, and maybe sneak into the Oscars, right? So he takes the parking pass home. Next day, same thing. Puts on a suit, goes to the exact same parking pass or parking lot. He has his parking pass. And he's looking around. And then he's looking around and he's like seeing Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, Will Smith, like you name it. All the big stars are there and they're just setting up and they're just like, just walking around casually. And it just becomes like this surreal experience. And he's looking around and then all of a sudden he sees Asians, right? He happens to be Korean American. And he's like, what are Asians doing here at the Oscars? Well, this was 2002, I believe, and this is when Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon was nominated 10 times. So as some of the guys are taking a smoke break, he casually walks up. Security's like, hey, what are you doing? And then he just like speaks broken Korean, like, I don't know, like, I'm bad at doing impressions. So they just assume he's Chinese, and then they say, hey, all right, let's go. So he walks in with Zhang Ziyi and Chow Yun-fat, as if he's like part of Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon, just casually, right? So inside, they station off the whole cast for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And he's just sitting there, and because they won 10 nominations, every like 10, 20 minutes or so, like people are just clapping. And at first he's like, no, yes, thank you. So he's starting to blend in, right? And at that time, it's such a surreal experience. People are congratulating him, introducing themselves to him, and he's pretending like, yeah, no, he didn't even watch the film. That's the crazy part. He's like, thank you so much. Yes, it was really difficult. And then after after the Oscars is over, people are like, hey, so John, are you going to the after party? He's like, what after? No, yeah, the after party, right. I was so excited, I forgot. So then he kind of hustles around, and then he finds out, I think the restaurant was like Crustacean at Beverly Hills or something like that. I gotta check my book, I forgot. Chapter 15. So, this is before like Google Maps and stuff like that. So he asks a few gas stations, and he uses the old bathroom trick. So he says, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. Gets past the security guard. And over there, he makes a friend. He was one of the actors, Chang Chen. He's one of the actors for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And he starts introducing him to all the Sony executives. So he met all the VPs, everyone from marketing, all that kind of stuff. 2 months later, he gets to work at Sony, and he lands his dream job. Can anyone take a wild guess who this person is by any chance? Flip the slide. So this guy was the manager of Psy that brokered a deal with Scooter Braun, the manager of Justin Bieber that was able to get Gangnam Style to the US, which helped it become viral. His name is Q, by the way, not John. Yeah, that's that guy right there. So Q's story was just like mine, and I was so amazed. Time and time and time again, all he did was show up over and over and over again. The exact same thing that I was able to replicate here in the US for every single industry. And that's the story I want to share with you guys today. Don't be afraid to ask. Just go out there and show up, because very few people do. And if you can do that, whether you're trying to pursue that dream job or just an internship or a business, you'll probably end up pretty far. Thank you.
We don't have a handheld mic, so I'm going to speak into Kevin's chest right now. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, how are you doing?
We've got some time for Q&A. We set aside a lot of time for Q&A because I know that a number of you are going to have questions. So because we want to capture this, after you ask your question, Kevin's going to repeat the question back so that the camera can, and the video can capture that. And then we'll go ahead and just let him riff on any topics you want to bring to the table. Sound good? All right, let's make it happen.
Cool. Bring it. Yeah.
Any reason you were ousted by your own by Dealflicks?
Oh man, that's
No.
no. It's a great story. So my business partner that ousted me, we actually go back about 13 years. So when I was making $10,000 a month doing network marketing, he was actually one of my first friends in America. He was kind of like a mentor figure, and we reunited about 8 years later. But unfortunately, I think because his experience was limited to network marketing and sales, I felt like we needed advisors, mentors, investors to get involved to help us guide us to the next level from 15 million to maybe 150 million. And when I felt like he was starting to make bad decisions, I started saying, hey, we need to talk to investors. We even did marriage counseling and whatnot to try to kind of salvage that business partnership. But when I talked to a few more investors, he saw it as personal betrayal. And then I ended up getting fired from my own company. So I thought that I was making, and I still do, I thought I was making the best decision for all the investors, clients, and management team to get just more veterans involved. Because the oldest guy in our company was like 31, 32 at that time. So it's probably a good idea to get some wisdom in there. And I guess he didn't really agree with me. That's the short version of it.
I like your idea of social arbitrage, exchange of value. Was there any instances where a party would bail out on that, and if so, how did you like repair that link in the chain?
Okay, so the question was, he liked the idea of social arbitrage. Was there an incident where a party would bail out on that? So basically, you're asking if I told the news outlet, hey, I'm going to get a programmer, and I don't get a programmer, and I'm basically screwed, right? That's That's a really good question. I can't really think of a particular time that I screwed up on that. There's got to be a time that it didn't work, but I guess knock on wood, I just can't. Let me get back to you on that. Maybe if I can think of something.
It's a good plan.
Yeah, it's a good plan. I mean, sometimes I guess what you can do if a situation doesn't work like that, you can kind of like delay the deal or whatnot. But you got to really know what you're doing. You got to be very confident. I'll tell you a quick. So this is how I learned the social arbitrage strategy. Have any of you guys like partied in Vegas before? Like, just be honest. I know it's a school environment. Okay, got a few hands. Have any of you guys ever gotten like bottle service at like a premier nightclub? Ever? Not yet. Student status. Okay, you'll get there at some point, right? So when I was younger, I really liked partying every now and then. I didn't party a lot, but when I went to Vegas, I liked to have a good time. And I got tired of just kind of standing there. Like, I wanted to really get bottle service. And I don't want to pay like $5,000 to get bottle service at like, really awesome nightclub. So one day I devised this hack. And it was like the most brilliant hack ever. So I go to the nightclub, I walk around, I look for guys that have like the most expensive looking drinks and like nicest attire. And I tell them, hey, you should meet my girlfriends over there. Like, they really want to, hang out with you guys. And then I introduce myself, and then they tell me where they're from, all their occupations. I get to know them. Go to the restroom, enter all that information, memorize that. I go to the girls and say, hey, you should join me and my friends. We're getting bottle service. And then I memorize their names. I go over there. So I'm just market making again. I introduce the guys to the girls, girls to the guys. Free drinks all night long, right? Because that's what they want to do. Guys go there to meet girls. Girls want to get free drinks and have a good time. So it was the same idea over and over and over again. And it just blows my mind. People don't think of that. But anyways.
So for Dealflicks, how big was the temptation to give up, and when was it the greatest?
You know what? It was really tough. So as you know, I lived in a van for 2 years, and I was so comfortable living in a van. I lived in a van for an extra year, because when you live in a van for that long, it's just like all this space. You're just like, oh my God, there's so much space here. I want to go back into my van. Your reality starts to get distorted. So my friends were just like, dude, you lost your mind. So when I got fired, I was so zoned in, it just didn't feel like I got fired. I felt like I was just like a ghost. Like, it just felt like, I remember I mentioned it in my book or, another LinkedIn post, like, I know I lived in a van for 2 years. I felt like I could have done it for 20 years because I really believed in the company and I thought we could really go really far. But, I talk about it in my book. It's not hard to work hard. So I think being a trader really helped me. Because one of the things that I learned becoming a trader was that you can lose millions of dollars in any given moment. It doesn't matter if your company is worth $15 million, one bad trade, or if you have $15 million saved in your brokerage account, one bad trade, you can get wiped out. So I was a retail trader during the Great Recession, and my first few phone calls were just grown men, like 2 or 3 times my age, just crying on the phone. Like, I remember a couple times, like, they're talking about suicide, and I'm trying to place this trade. I can't buy or sell. I can't add an extra zero, or they're just going to axe you because they're just laying everyone off. So when I was doing Dealflicks, every single day, no matter how hard it was, I remembered those people that lost money so quickly. Living in a van was like, dude, it's not that bad. I was just, wow, this is great. So I really enjoyed the whole entire experience. And I actually talk about this in my book a little bit more too. It's called, reality distortion. If you think about, like, in the grand scheme of things, we live in a first world country, right? If I were to say, hey, I have a van to live in, there are some countries that would be, people in certain countries that would be like, dude, you even have a van to live in. Wow, you're living it, right? So reality is really relative. So I never really felt like giving up. It was just when I was really excited, it was just like the same emotions I felt when I was really down. And I think that was really helpful being a trader for a few years when I became an entrepreneur. I never really had that emotional roller coaster as much. The only time I wanted to give up was like when we were doing marriage counseling, and I felt like my co-founder did not get it. So that was probably the only time I really wanted to give up.
Kevin, I know one of your stories is that when you were out on the road living in your, you call your man van,
Mm-hmm.
and you were asked about living in the van, and you got, there was like a crossroads. You had a crisis of honesty, and you weren't sure whether you should share with the reporter what you guys were doing because you were embarrassed. You were living in a van, and you decided to own it. Talk about that experience, what that did in your mind at that point, when you shared it, and then what the aftermath was.
Yeah, so when I first started living in a van, I didn't want anyone to know because I thought my clients, my investors, and all my friends and family and all of Silicon Valley would kind of start looking down on us or not take us very seriously. And it wasn't until South by Southwest. Are you guys familiar with South by Southwest? It's like a tech conference, they have music and stuff like that. And we were kind of walking around, and then we bumped into a reporter. He was from the Pando Daily. And then my business partner looked at the reporter, and he's like, you got to interview this guy. He lives in a van. This is a crazy story. And I was like, dude, what are you doing, right? So he was like, he already had the mic, and he was just so excited to talk about it. I was like, all right, let me just kind of own the story now. So that was very similar to my experience when I was doing network marketing, when I knew that, okay, like my English isn't that great. I don't really understand American culture that well. But if I just own it and not act ashamed, then people will just respect me. So a lot of it is just kind of psychological. Like if I'm like going to reporters and telling people and like telling investors like, hey, don't share this story, then people are going to have a different perception of the man van. But what I did instead in that particular moment, I told the reporter the exact same story I told you guys. I told them we looked at the data. We did, after we signed up our first 100 theaters, 99 of them signed up only after some kind of face-to-face interaction. The more face-to-face interactions that we had, the shorter the sales cycle. And this is how much it costs, and this is how much we're saving. And then it was a done deal. I just owned the story, and then it became huge. And I think what really helped at that time, we were already getting some media coverage, and then it just put fuel on the fire, and then that became like this huge media thing at one particular point.
Did that change your kind of selling process or the ways that you presented yourself to, I guess, future prospective clients?
That helped a lot. So when someone hears about you, as you guys progress in your career, it's going to be less about what you present at that particular moment, because if you start building a reputation in your industry or like a niche of your industry, people are going to hear about you before you show up. So it was like really funny because the clients would joke around with us and like, hey, down by the river, blah blah blah, like where do you guys sleep? Like when do you guys shower? How do you guys bring girls? Like it was just really just random questions, right? In terms of the sales process, it kind of built this relationship before we met the clients. So people in the movie industry, I actually talk about this, I call it the 24-hour rule. I could email, text message, anyone from AMC, Regal, Cinemark, C-level executive, and usually I'll get a response within 24 hours. Even though I'm significantly younger, I don't have like the wisdom some of these guys have. Out of respect, they just respond to me. Hey, you want to take a meeting? No, yes, no. And recently, I think that's almost been shortened to 24 minutes. So that was really exciting to kind of see, my brand grow as a columnist and, becoming like this, part-time journalist to kind of build that persona and brand to kind of shorten that sales cycle. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
What separates someone who's a good salesman and someone who's exceptional?
Oh, I love this question. It's hit the spot. What separates a good salesman from an exceptional salesman? So, how many of you guys like read some sales books out there? What's the book that you read?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I forgot the name, but it
Okay. Zig Ziglar. Who Moved My Cheese? I don't know.
Possibly.
Okay. Anyone else?
Who moved my cheese?
Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think good salespeople are just good at sales. They're kind of one-dimensional. They're like ABC, always be closing. They'll give you the most cliche advice. But I think exceptional salespeople, they don't think like a salesperson. They just think like a human psychologist. So what I really loved to do was I read about, Maslow, Freud, and just like Paul Ekman, microexpressions. Oh my God, that was like one of the best things I studied. So Paul Ekman, I forgot what school he was. He's actually a psychologist, but he studies facial expressions. And according to him, there's only really 7 muscles that you can look at someone's face to really understand facial recognition patterns with the words that they say. Now, I'm not saying I'm a facial recognition expert, but that curiosity of wanting to understand people, how do they think? What do they operate? Like, what is their Myers-Briggs personality test? Have any of you guys taken the Myers-Briggs personality? All my friends took the Myers-Briggs personality test. All my employees take the Myers-Briggs personality test. And it's not because I want to kind of box them into something. Like, I want to know how to communicate better to an ENTJ versus an INTP. Like, that's what's important for me, because sometimes people don't really care about what you say. They care about how they feel when you say it. They want to know, So the focus has to shift. You have to have that ability to put yourself in other shoes. So whether I was talking to a reporter or editor breaking into Wall Street or Silicon Valley or what have you, I always started from like, what does that person really want? Whether it was like Las Vegas, like what do they really want? And then you just start reverse engineering that, and then you can come up with a pitch that really aligns with their vision. Kind of heavy, huh? Like a little too much, sorry. Yeah.
So what do you see yourself doing like in the next 5-10 years? Are you looking to like become a full-time writer, or?
You know what? I'm just like you guys. I'm trying to figure out my next move. Yeah. So at this point, I'm really enjoying advising a couple startups. One of the startups that I'm advising is Xinhua. They've been all over the news the past couple of days. They're a competitor. Have you guys heard of MoviePass by any chance? Yes, they're the competitor of MoviePass. So I think they have a much more sustainable business model. Go check it out. But I'm really enjoying advising startups at this moment. I went back to get my MBA at the University of Chicago. It's a weekend program, just to understand like what I need to do as a entrepreneur or as a future business professional to really understand what I want to do for the next 50 years. So for me, it's never been really like, hey, I have to be like this entrepreneur or this corporate person. I think it's just whether you're working in a corporate environment or starting a new business, if you have that entrepreneurial mindset, you can pretty much do anything, right? So I'm still trying to figure out the X's and O's and trying to figure out where I want to go.
So you mentioned how you got into tech. I'm personally a computer science student, so I see that you bridge sort of this gap from marketing into tech. I'm kind of interested in bridging the gap the other way around, sort of take what I know from technology and coding and all that, and maybe advise to companies on how to market that and how to do that. What would you say is like the best way to bridge that gap? Because they're kind of two different mindsets. How did you get tech people to understand your vision, and how do you think maybe a tech person can get someone like you to understand their vision?
No, that's a great question. So the question was, I was able to bridge my gap in tech by compensating by sales and marketing, and this gentleman is trying to do the opposite. He has a background in tech, but he wants to bridge that gap in sales and marketing to kind of become more well-rounded. Does that kind of top your question? So I think you're in a good position. I think it's a lot easier to learn sales and marketing than it is to learn tech, like coding and whatnot. So coding takes a lot of time. You have to kind of concentrate for a few months to actually kind of build a stable backbone. But when it comes to sales and marketing, there's no better way to learn than by actually doing. So one of the things that really helped me bridge some gaps in digital marketing recently was just launching a book. So I wasn't that strong in SEO, SEM. Yeah, I was at the meetings at Dealflicks and some of the other company meetings to kind of explain the tech product and kind of have a holistic understanding. But it wasn't until I started doing Amazon ads, Facebook ads, SEO, SEM, building a website myself, that I really kind of honed in on it. So my recommendation would be like, hey, if there's a product that you want to sell, sell it on Amazon or sell it on selling on your website or what have you. And if you want to learn PR, then hey, start making some phone calls, talk to some editors, talk to some writers, try to get on the news, or even a blog article about your product. Then you're probably going to have a good handle or at least a good feel for how sales and marketing works.
You did a poll earlier in the presentation asking what some of the students wanted to do once they were done, once they graduated, and it looked like the numbers were kind of small.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, what would be your advice for those students that are getting ready to graduate, they're right on the cusp of graduating, but they still haven't really determined, like they haven't really specified specific or made it specific as to what they want to do. What would be your best advice?
So the question was, I guess like a simplified version, the question was for those students who are graduating and who are unsure, what can I do to help make a decision on what I want to do, right? Okay, so I guess like what was really fascinating to me about my experience getting fired from my own company was that I realized I had such, kind of like answering your question earlier, I had such tunnel vision, I was so myopic that I wasn't able to use a wide range of skill sets. So I was so strong at sales and marketing, even though I had a background in finance, strategy, whatnot, we weren't really leveraging those sales skills because me being away for sales and marketing for like an hour would cost the company maybe 10 hours of someone else's time. So I started becoming like really myopic on what I was doing. But getting fired from my own company was a huge blessing in disguise because I started to see careers very differently. And as I started writing my book and started doing some research, instead of seeing your career in a singular fashion, we live in a day and age where jobs switch in a blink of an eye. Industries come and go, companies come and go. Like the average lifetime of a company is like 15 years now. It's just crazy, right? So to kind of have this singular vision of a career is very risky. It's almost like investing in one particular stock. So I like the idea of almost risk mitigating and thinking of your career as a portfolio of companies. So one thing I would recommend is that if there's a few sectors that interest you, yeah, get that job, work 40, 50 hours a week, but maybe sell products on Amazon on the side, see if you like digital marketing. Get a job as an accountant, but learn coding on the side. Now, what's fascinating about that concept is that my book recently became an Amazon bestseller. I'm actually in talks with a Russian publication company called Xmo. They're the largest publishing house in Russia. And it's very odd for an independent book to have that kind of attention, especially for foreign countries. And the book's only been out for 6 weeks. Now, why is this book so special? Well, for a business person, I'm actually a good writer. And for a good writer, I'm actually a pretty good business person. So at that intersection, I'm able to become like this unique person with exceptional skill. Now, when you start crossing certain interests together, whether it's like finance with tech with entertainment, you start naturally beating out your competition. And I really enjoy the idea of synergizing different career ladders as you grow. So I wouldn't focus too much on like, hey, I have to be a coder, I have to be an accountant. Like, heck, I've switched my career so many times, and they're all kind of tying in together. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Yeah. Okay.
So we all know that many of our students are not going to open a company or start a company and so on. They're looking for a job. And nothing wrong with this. They need to sell themselves. They need to market themselves. They need to expose themselves somehow. Do you have any advice? Can you help them get a better job and how to get it?
So the question was, how do you market yourself when you're trying to land a job? Like, how do you differentiate yourself from your competition? So I guess like one of the things that really helped me was obviously getting like the internships and all that, learning how to like take exams. So for example, when I was jumping into finance, I tried to get my Series 6 and Series 7, their trading licenses. And then I took the CFA Level 1. Fortunately, I passed. But if you're trying to start early on in your career, it's going to be very difficult to stand out unless you can bring something else to the table. So in this day and age, one thing that really helps when, what I've noticed is that if you can kind of like shine in like digital marketing, where certain companies like really hate to do, then you can automatically stand out. Like if you are kind of want to expand that and you want to learn, you know, a little bit of coding or kind of couple that with content marketing, you could really separate yourself from other candidates. So I think it's just, you just kind of have to put in the work of just developing a skill set that companies would find useful. So I don't think there's really too much of a shortcut, but if you can start combining skill set on skill set, then you start really separating yourself. Of course, there are certain skills that we can learn a lot more faster, such as, I think digital marketing is a really good one. The game is constantly changing, the algorithms are constantly changing. So if you keep up with that by selling, you know, certain products or building a website, you could really separate yourself. Or even like getting an internship that is a little bit different from the industry you want to go in. Then you can market yourself and say something like, hey, you know, I worked at, let's say, this art history museum, but I want to be an accountant, or I want to become, like, I want to work in finance. I have this ability to see problems at a different angle. So a lot of it's like selling a story. Now, here's the thing. If you don't know what separates yourself from the competition, here's a trick. So I actually got my first ghostwriting deal for an entrepreneur who was an advisor that sold his company with his friends for $50 million. And I call this a digital verbal vomit, right? So whatever you think, just spit it out onto a recorder. Like, what makes you so good? What makes you so unique? Just for 30 minutes. Just like say everything that comes to mind. Now, if you do that for, let's say, 30 minutes, that's roughly about like 4 or 5 pages. If you do it for like 2 hours, that could be something like 20 pages. And as you start just kind of having a dialogue with yourself, you're going to find so much about yourself. It's crazy. And I remember there were chapters in my book where I would just walk around and talk on my voice recorder for like just constantly until I figured out why would anyone read this chapter. It's the same thing. Why would anyone care about your resume? There has to be something unique. So just go out there, have a drink or two, and then just vomit it all out. And you'd be surprised. There's always something very unique about each and every individual. And as a writer, that was actually one of the joys that I had doing interviews, whether it was, you know, the manager for Psy, or, you know, Kevin Johnson from Udemy, the CEO of Udemy, or John Salmons, ex-NBA basketball player. There are always these unique stories that you can find by just kind of like talking to yourself and just finding an angle. Hope that helps. Yeah.
This is a question on networking. So as a student, like we learn, you know, to present ourselves as professionals, and maybe start a conversation with small talk about how their day is going, or what they like, and find something common, and then go get you, and then just get into your the stuff that you want to talk about. But as a professional in your career, how would that sort of networking be differ from our networking now as a student?
Yeah, so here's the thing. I think, I forgot who said this recently, but someone said, don't do small talk, just jump straight to medium talk. So everyone, like, when they go to a networking event, like, hey, you know, how's the weather? Yeah, you watched that football game last night. It's just like, dude, you're here to network, right? So a lot of times I would just kind of introduce myself, hey, my name is Kevin, blah, blah, blah. I would just go straight with the fastball, because it just almost kind of seems sneaky. It's like, hey, yeah, the weather's sunny. Hey, my name is Kevin. You know, I'm from Dealflicks. Like, you know that it's coming, and they know it's coming. Like, why hide it, right? So, you know, I wouldn't, you know, when you're networking, you want to kind of like come up with interesting topics where you can connect with someone. Just ask something kind of like, you know, how's the business going? You know, what do you think about like a current issue? Like, what do you think about things going on that the president's doing, you know? So talk about something more heavier to kind of get their attention. Now, here's a trick that I'd love to share. If you're going to a networking event, right, whether it's a trade show or a convention, call the registered people who actually run the show and see if you can get an email list. Call up ahead of time. Then you make a list of all the VIPs, put them on an Excel spreadsheet. Stalk them on Facebook, LinkedIn, look for articles that they published, articles that they've been on. Research all that. There's nothing that impresses me more when someone walks up to me and says, hey, I read your article about blah, 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 instead of saying, hey, can you teach me about writing or can you teach me about this? And that just made a world of difference in my career because everyone, like, I get all these sleazy emails on LinkedIn and like, hey, let me help you with digital marketing. Hey, do you need a tech co-founder? All these emails and whatnot. No one does, like, you can Google my name. Like, no one does the freaking research to do what the latest thing I'm doing. And it just bothers me how people just don't go that extra mile, especially when you have the internet. If you're trying to meet a VIP, it's all there. It's all public information. Just look them up, find them on LinkedIn, do the research ahead of time, impress them with your knowledge about that person. And it's almost like you built a relationship before you even met them. So instead of saying, hi, my name is Joe, blah, 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 I'm like, hey, that article about social arbitrage, I think that was so great. Can you tell me more? It's like, oh, wow, he actually took the time to read my article, blah, blah, blah. So if you could just do something like that, especially when you're younger, oh my God, you'd skip 5 years of middle management just doing something like that.
Kevin, one thing you talk about is avoiding the frenemy zone. What is that?
Hey, do you guys know what the friend zone is? I'm sure, right? So in my book, I call it the frenemy zone. So what is the basis of comparison, right? What is the basis of competition? It's because we compare ourselves with one another. We compare ourselves to our friends, our colleagues, the people closest to you, right? And where does that word come from? Friends and enemy, right? Frenemy, right? So throughout my career, I realized a lot of the people who made the biggest impact in my life came from my vertical network. And when I talk about my vertical network, it's people who can either push me from the bottom, people kind of like who lived in a van, or people who've actually done a startup and been there and done that, like a professor who taught me, people who can pull me from the top, right? A lot of the times, we waste so much time networking in the frenemy zone. We go to a networking event where it's all accountants. Then we go to a networking event where it's all lawyers. We're all competing for the same job, same position, and what have you. We get out of work, and we talk crap about our bosses, right? Little do we know, in 6 months, we're going to fight with the same colleague to get the promotion. So when I first got my job at E-Trade, I was just so shocked at how much backlash there was against my bosses. I'm like, why do people hate their bosses so much? And then I was like, man, this is great. My boss probably doesn't have any friends. So if I can be the only friend, I'm probably going to get promoted. I was like, how are people, how do they not get that? So about like a weekend, no one even ever taught me this. So about a weekend, I actually made a promise to myself. I'm not going to make friends with any of my colleagues at E-Trade because I think in about 6 months, I'll get promoted. And that's exactly what happened, right? I just became good friends with my boss. Of course, I worked really hard. My nickname was OT Kevin after I worked 23 days in a row, including Saturday and Sunday. So they called me OT Kevin. But that's the basis behind it. Yes, you should definitely have friends because normally they're really good for emotional support. You spend time with them. You guys could exchange notes and stuff like that. But I would say 80–90% of the time, you spend times with your friends and people in similar areas, similar status in terms of your career with all these friends. But if you can just expand maybe 10% of your time to 15% of your time spending it with professors, people older than you, people younger than you, then your career can go so much further. Now, why did I go to Chicago booth? Everyone was like, dude, Kevin, you don't need an MBA. You're a freaking C-level executive for a subsidiary of one of the biggest companies in movie theaters, right? So the reason why I went to Chicago booth was because I wanted to build my vertical network. I wanted to understand what younger people are thinking these days. Because at this point in my career, it's not going to be, professors or mentors that are going to help me as much. The people that are going to help me are the people that I mentor, the people that I help younger in their career that are going to push me upwards because they're the future. That's how I saw it. So when I wrote my book was supposed to be for a younger demographic because I wanted to build a relationship with them. And that's what I mean by avoid the frenemy zone and focus on building a vertical network. Kind of heavy, huh? It's a lot of things. Yeah, it's, it's a lot of stuff. Any more questions? Yeah.
I want to ask a question for me. So, when you're starting up your own company, like, what is the biggest cost, and also, like, what are some tips for you to acquire some investment from the like investors and stuff like that?
Okay, so the question was, when you're starting your company, what's the cost, like overhead?
Yeah, the biggest cost.
Biggest cost, and then how do you get money from your investors, right? Okay, so I've seen a lot of different versions. So normally, like nowadays, it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur. Yeah, and nowadays you have tech. Like you can have, as long as you can plug in, to the internet, you can start, a tech company in Mumbai, Miami, wherever, right? So we live in this golden age of entrepreneurship. So if you find the right co-founders and the right business partners, you don't really have to have a lot of cost initially because you're just giving them, hey, here's 30% of the company, here's 50% of the company, et cetera. So I would focus on building the right team, but then you also can't really think of it as from a financial perspective. There's also the value of time, right? Is it worth it for me to go out and raise money? Is it worth it versus get a co-founder that's technical? So you have to kind of assess it in those terms. So it really depends on what kind of, if you're going to start like a restaurant, I mean, obviously there's going to be a lot more overhead. But if you're building a tech company, your operational costs should be extremely low. In terms of raising money, I think generally it starts kind of like how it always started. There's a lot of friends and family that initially invest in you. When you start talking to investors, they're going to look at some numbers. Now, that's if your company has kind of expanded to a certain extent. But a lot of times, angel investors will look at how confident you are, how good your team is, how are you doing month to month. And what really helped when we were doing Dealflicks, and I think a lot of the good CEOs do this in Silicon Valley, it's almost like they build a relationship with potential investors, whether they invest in them or not, because they only need to have to say yes once. They can say no, in January, no in February. If they say yes in March, hey, then you might have just raised $100,000, right? So you give them monthly updates. Hey, we got this new, business partner. Hey, we got this new VP of sales. Hey, we got this, article written about us. So you want to build that relationship, and over the course of time, start showing the progress that you've made to a lot of these investors, and that, I've noticed that a lot of successful CEOs do that. Yeah.
I have a question. So I'm a business guy. I tried my best to learn Android Studio. Could barely make a calculator, spending hours and hours on it, and I know I cannot code for the life of me, no matter how hard I try. Maybe if I tried super duper hard, I might get it. But how would I, as a business guy, break into tech and really make an impact?
So the question was, I'm trying to code, and then I'm having a hard time learning tech. How can I, as a business guy, how can I break into tech, yes, right? So I think, my example is a perfect example. So it was really funny. So they used to call me the theater whisperer because I would sign up all these theaters. And then I was also, I recruited all our tech guys too in the beginning. And what you probably need to focus on is showing your acumen in terms of sales and marketing. Because programmers, often, no offense to any programmers here, by the way. Okay. No offense, but a lot of times programmers have a hard time recruiting even other programmers. They're just not vision people. They're great at explaining a functionality of the product, but they have a tough time explaining why. Why do we do this? Why do we need to press this? Why do I need to sell this product? So if you have a sales and marketing background, or you're the CEO, you need to kind of initiate that passion in other people. So you need to focus on that. Now, it's almost like going into a bar. You want to go into a situation where the odds favor you, right? So if you're going to Silicon Valley, for example, you go to a meetup.com event, you'll find 30 entrepreneurs versus one programmer, and they just all flock over to that programmer, taking turns pitching their idea. It's like the most ridiculous thing ever, right? So obviously, I shared with you the USC example, just walking around campus, try to get them, where they least expect it. Another great example was, you know, like those hackathons?
Yes.
So they have weekend hackathons, stuff like that, and then everyone presents, everyone's like so excited. So what I would do is that I would go on the last day of the hackathon, and then I would wait, and I would wait for like second, third, and fourth place, the ones that didn't win, where they kind of feel like low about themselves. And then I would show up, I'm like, hey, I got the startup idea. And you don't know how effective that is, because most business people don't really think to go to these hackathons. Now, maybe everyone knows this hack by now, but I was able to get, you know, a couple programmers into our trial period at least, just by going to hackathons and telling them, hey, you know, like I'm really excited to recruit you, and then just by convincing them. Now, you might think it's kind of like a hack, but you're also showing that I can really think outside the box as an entrepreneur. You're not just this textbook guy that reads a bunch of stuff about Ben Horowitz and Paul Graham and Lean Startup, like the same. I hate it when tech guys like regurgitate the same old ideas. Like, I get it. That Lean Startup came out 7 years ago. Give me a break. Lean Startup, I lived in a van. Give me a break, right? So when you can exemplify that, they start to see you as like a Caesar opposed to a Cicero. You're not just this orator. You can actually walk the walk and talk the talk. And so often, these really good programmers, they have a story where they talk about how their CEO sold this amazing vision, and then they weren't able to back it up. And if you can be that one person that can walk the walk and talk the talk, oh my God, you could go pretty far. So I would focus on that if you know, you can't still figure out coding, but hopefully you do.
Hopefully not, actually, I hate it. But my follow-up question is,
Yeah.
what would, I guess it's more of a technical question, but for example, if I am talking to a programmer and he's interested in joining my company, how do you divvy up kind of like the equity and all that? For example,
Oh,
I
man.
tried to recruit one of my friends once, and I told him, hey, I'll give you 10%. And he just laughed and laughed and laughed. So
Yeah.
how do you do that reasonably and like not give away all of your business?
Yeah, no, that's a really sensitive topic. So I think one of the things that could have worked out better if my business partner and I had more equal equity, but he had about 2.5 times more than I did. I joined the company about 6 months, 7 months later, and then he was very, I guess he kind of hoarded his equity essentially. But it's really this black box where you just don't know. So I was actually recently at a Y Combinator event. Are you guys familiar with Y Combinator? So, you know, Dropbox and some of the best companies, Airbnb came from Y Combinator. And they're talking about they do not like to invest in companies where the equity split is too much. They like it when they're equal, because a lot of co-founder breakups happen when there's a severe gap in equity. So one of the things I was reading, I think it was called Founder's Dilemma, Norm Wasserman, they talk about how you shouldn't have a gap of like 5% or 10% unless someone's like a super, super rock star, because some people will have that learning curve where it's just like you're just significantly better like the first 2 months. Yeah, but eventually, unless they're, you know, really bad, they're going to catch up eventually. And also, there's also certain founders, what they do is that after about a year or two, they'll reassess the equity, or once a year. So they'll kind of have this like wiggle room, kind of like a pool of equity when they decide, hey, you know, I think you did more. Like maybe you should take 5% or you should take 3% less. So they rebalance it over a course of time. So there's different ways to do it, but most importantly, you gotta kind of have to like talk to your co-founder and just really find out if that's something you're comfortable with and he or she's comfortable with.
Got it, thank you.
Yes.
Small observation here. After 25 years of career, part of your life actually parallels part of mine, because I had multiple capabilities, Master's in Mechanical, Master's in Business, my SAC licenses, so basically, I understand what you're talking about. I do have, there's one observation that you made I'm going to push back a little bit on. Do not, if you're any kind of a major organization, startup's another thing, but a major, don't suck up to the boss. Because in most companies now, that promotion is going to be a 5 or 6 person team evaluating, not your boss. And part of that will be your peers. If your peers say that this person was just nothing more to suck up to the boss, and never interface with us, you're dead. The idea that all you have to do is ignore your peers and just take care of your boss and they'll take care of you doesn't work in the major world. It might in a small startup where there isn't anybody above them watching it, but anything above, $50 million, it's dead. So do take that into account, please.
Yeah, adding on, so maybe the E-Trade story was maybe a little bit more intense. But, you know, I do encourage people to, like, you know, build relationships with their coworkers, but don't, I guess what I was trying to say is, like, be candid with your boss. Like, so I'll give you a perfect example. So after I got fired from my own startup, so I'm the type of guy that will be very candid and tell you what you think, whether you're my boss or my intern or anything like that. So one of the things that really surprised me after leaving, or, you know, having that unfortunate ending with Dealflicks, was I became a corporate executive for this big company. So there's 600 people, there's 8 other subsidiaries, 9 other subsidiaries. And what I realized is that when someone walks in the door, the way they talk to you is so different the way they talk to your boss. And I didn't really realize that when I was younger, but after working at a startup, you start to see these small little nuances. And I actually talk about it in my book. So you don't have to be a suck-up. Just be very candid. Like, everything I did, it always had to align with my values and what I stood for as a person. And if it didn't align with me, I would always tell them how I thought. So I remember the first meeting, a week after I joined Cinema Intelligence, my boss and I, we were having an argument, and the product manager, was agreeing with my boss, just like everything he was saying. So I looked at my boss, I looked at my product manager, I said, close the door, right? So they close the door, and I tell them, look, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. And I didn't mean it in a condescending way, but I told them, hey, I built these relationships face to face, meeting every single movie theater across the country. So in certain situations, I feel like, you have to be able to communicate with your boss and just tell them honestly what you're really thinking. You don't have to be, like a suck up and, kick down your colleagues and stuff like that. But you also have to hold your ground firm and just be able to show like why you're in the position you're in, or how you can be a value add for the organization. But E-Trade was very different kind of environment where I thought a lot of my colleagues were excessively not appreciating their position. So at that particular time, I felt that understanding my boss and trying to be more supportive really helped a lot. Not just in terms of my career, but in terms of the company morale and whatnot. So, yeah.
You mentioned Myers-Briggs earlier. Are there other measurement tools like emotional intelligence, et cetera, that are important for you to understand yourself, understand the other members of your team, and those interactions?
There's a lot of different tests out there that I looked into. I actually have my own system internally on a spreadsheet based on certain people's tendencies and whatnot. But I heavily lean on the Myers-Briggs, and I think it comes to the power of interpreting it. So someone would say, okay, you're an INTJ, so you're like this all the time. But as you know from the Myers-Briggs, it's always like a percentage. Are you like 70% versus 30% introvert? That just means like 7 times out of 10, he's probably going to be an introvert, but it doesn't always mean that person's going to be that type of person. So it kind of, you kind of understand how someone's default setting is, and then you're more sensible to how their attitude or how their morale is shifting depending on the task or the situation and whatnot. But to answer your question, I kind of have like this internal system that I do, some kind of weird like that, and then it's been mostly Myers-Briggs. Yeah.
During your presentation and everything, I know you were mentioning some details about personal branding, as well as one of your articles you were talking about like how things have changed and you need to rebrand yourself since like the time like I can't remember. I think it was with a car salesman. That's the example you had used, and how things have kind of shifted from back in the days to people being more informed now.
Yes.
So could you kind of elaborate more for people as far as like education and things of that nature go?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I believe he was referring to one of my articles, Why the Wolves of Wall Street Has Died and What It Means to Your Business. Okay, so one of the articles I recently published for Inc. magazine was talking about how sales has changed over a course of time. So oftentimes when we think about the sales profession, we think about kind of like a used car salesman or like a stockbroker that's just constantly bugging you, telling you to buy. And this kind of practice was ubiquitous 20 or 30 years ago. Now, nowadays, if you go to the Apple store, like if you just look at the phone, there's like so much functionality, opposed to maybe like a vacuum cleaner where you just plug it in and turn it on 30, 40 years ago. So what does this mean? Well, hypothetically, let's say, for example, if I were to buy a car 40 years ago, there's no such thing as like Kelly's Blue Book. If I were to buy a stock, I don't have easy access to financial statements. I can't just go on the internet and look at their numbers. So in the past, salespeople hoarded this information. They had so much leverage against the customer or the consumer because they were able to have access to the information that the customer or the potential client didn't have, right? So in this day and age, as products and services are becoming more and more sophisticated, the sales cycle has become a lot longer. The customers are a lot more knowledgeable. So you have to build a relationship with those customers and clients and kind of come from more of a educational standpoint, act more like a consultant and a value provider opposed to pushing sales, et cetera. So the game has changed quite a bit. And the irony behind it is that I think a lot of companies and startups haven't really digested that. Like they're aware of it, especially when I see a lot of tech CEOs that are in their like 20s and early 30s and whatnot. They don't really understand that sales has changed so much in the past 20, 30 years. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier the importance of digital marketing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just curious, in your opinion, what do you think the most important aspects of that are?
So the question was, digital marketing is important, but what aspects of it are the most important components to it? Okay, so I think this varies depending on what you want to do. If you want to launch a business, it's good to just learn everything from like Facebook to Amazon to SEO, SEM, like even just tweak, learning how like Twitter works, all that kind of stuff. Just pay for ads, see how it works, see how it converts, build like your own little sales funnel. But what I hate about digital marketing is that when someone figures a hack out, like they'll counter hack it and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna change the algorithms on this. So it's just this constant game of cat and mouse where they're just constantly changing the game. So if you don't stay like on top of it, you're in about 3 or 6 months, some of the stuff that might not apply in 6 months, 9 months. As you guys know from Facebook, they're constantly changing their ads and how it's structured and all that kind of stuff. So it's really annoying. So if you're just trying to run a company and you want to delegate that, it's good to just get some practice to understand it. But if you want to become an expert, it's almost like trading. You just can't stop. You just have to constantly be current what the markets are doing. Otherwise, what you know might be irrelevant pretty quickly. So that's how I see it. Yeah.
So with your experience with business partners and
Yeah.
employees even, what advice could you give us to those of us who want to start our own business or improve upon an existing business? What kind of attributes of business partners are you looking for, and even red flags?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think so I hate to harp on my ex-business partner, but one of the red flags that he had was he was very prideful of his GPA in college. It was like the weirdest thing. So he had printed out his transcript. I mean, it was a nice looking 3.8. It's kind of envious of that, but it's not going to help us run a business. And he often said this thing where we're not going to hire anyone that came from a better school than mine. So that was very counterintuitive from exactly what normally you want to do the opposite. And for me, it was tough because he was my first friend when I moved from America. One of my first friends. He taught me kind of like the ropes of network marketing, and we had a history together. So there are certain people that cannot stand not being the smartest person in the room. So when you have like you and your friend, and of course being smart is relative, right? Like someone's going to be good at numbers, someone's going to be good at writing. But I think it's how you conceptualize how you're smart. Like maybe it's like your own in your head, your own overall smartness, whatever it is. So when you and your buddies start, it's like really smart to beat out one person to be the smartest guy, right? So let's say the company goes to 20. Like now you got to beat out 19 people, right, to become the smartest guy. Now the company goes to 200. You got to beat out 199 people to be the smartest guy. So I felt like as the company grew, I felt like he didn't feel as comfortable delegating. So that was like a red flag. So for me, it was really tough because we had this personal relationship. That's why I was willing to do marriage counseling and try to help out your friend. I think it might have helped if I saw him more as a business partner first, before as I saw as a friend. So those are, like red flags. There are people that are just extremely good at delegating. They're comfortable, like, hey, I'm just going to sell the vision. You're going to learn to code. But there are people that are just like, they'll work like 100 hours a week every night. And trust me, when you get to your 30s, you can't do that anymore. Like I noticed like there's two types of friends that were successful in their 20s. They're the people that are delegating that just keep going this way. And the friends that keep drinking Red Bull. Like I'm like, dude, you're 33. You got to cut off on this. You don't want to be the latter. You want to be able to build trust your team, be able to recruit the right people to keep scaling. Like my book is a perfect example. So the cover was done in Czech Republic. The interior was done. It started off in France, but it ended up in the US because I had an argument with my designer in France. Most of the market research to hit up schools and clubs to help me market was done by one of the outsourced employees that we worked at Dealflicks. I've been working with him for about 6 or 7 years now. So it was outsourced to India. I hired an intern through a Canadian startup that goes to the University of Michigan to do more market research for me. So it took a global effort to publish this book. And for me, I've always been comfortable delegating and teaching people how to delegate. I like to teach people, like, after they delegate, how they can delegate so my organization can scale. So there will always be some, red flags. Like, is he the type of person that always tries to take a little bit more? Like, whether it is, like, is he always trying to get more equity? Is he always trying to do less? Is there a disconnect between what he says and what he's actually doing? So this actually applies to dating. It's so funny. So when you hit your 30s, you end up having like 20 years of dating experience. It gets kind of crazy. But then the funny part is you start having like a lot of friends that go through divorces that ask for dating advice. And then they constantly fall into these same patterns like, well, he's not texting me back. Like, what do I do? Like, it just gets really crazy, right? So the same advice I almost give to whether entrepreneurship or dating is that don't worry at all what he texted you. Judge that person, like almost mute it, like, and judge by exactly what he says. When I was trying to learn how to become a better salesperson, what I would do is I would watch certain television shows or like the way certain athletes or certain people carry themselves. I would just mute it. So then I could just watch the whole thing, just body language. Like, how does Michael Jordan just interact with his teammates? Just the whole thing. How do they look at him? You just cut the noise out and just look at the actions. So that's, those are some of the things that I would do to kind of just train myself as a business professional. And when you start doing stuff like that, when you want to get better, you find ways to get better over and over again. So if you kind of start to look at that kind of stuff, it'll really help you judge someone's character. I feel like I'm answering questions on Quora. Yeah, good.
So I have kind of a similar question to the last question. I run my own business, and I've
Yeah.
been working for years, and I'm burnt out. And I recently have brought friends to work with me,
Mm-hmm.
so I have a little bit less work to do. What would you suggest I do to make sure that that relationship doesn't hit the point where I have to get marriage counseling?
So do you guys fight a lot, or?
No, I mean, I'm just recently bringing, more so right now it's like the teaching phase. So.
How long have you guys been working together?
Most of them are just people I've met around campus and stuff like that I feel like are bright minds.
Okay. Do you guys have like a culture doc or like a set of principles that you kind of go by?
Not really, honestly. Like, I'm
Okay.
on Facebook, so most of my stuff is just affiliate marketing through the network I created.
Okay.
So I'm kind of just teaching them how to do it at this point.
Okay.
I haven't really gotten to like any moral points or anything like that.
Okay. So I guess like one of the things that really helped me when I was living in a van. So think about like living in a van and you work 15, 16 hours with your boss, and your reward at the end of the day is to sleep next to him, right? Sounds like a great job, right? And you see him 7 days a week. You eat when he eats, you go to the gym when he showers. It's the same thing. Like, you could lose your mind. So one of the first things that I did was develop a 20-page culture doc. These are the principles that we're going to live and die by. These are what we all are going to agree to. And the interview process required someone to read the 20-page culture doc and fill out like a 5-page essay to see how they handle that kind of situation. And you can only judge someone so far by the way they write or the way they talk. But the first thing I think I would recommend is that just kind of have a candid conversation with your friends and just be like, hey, these are my values and these are uncompromisable, or what are some of the values you want to incorporate and how do we come up with like a mutual agreement? Then maybe you can have it like on an email or some kind of record, and just kind of constantly kind of like keep that up to date and hold each other accountable instead of like going off of memory or what you guys feel at that particular time. I think that could be really helpful. Yeah.
And one final, go ahead, David.
Earlier you mentioned that you did not like school and you were kind of doing it because your parents wanted you to go.
Yeah.
And now you're back to grad school.
Yes.
So in what time or why? What was the reason for deciding to go back? Was there something big that you want to get from going to grad school?
So I felt like I was going through this like nonconformist route too much. So I felt like if I did an MBA, it's kind of more about networking, understanding people, meeting people, exploring classes that you want to learn. So I wanted to kind of like retool my skills. It was so funny because like no one really believed me. And I remember one Ivy League school, I was interviewing for my MBA. It was supposed to be a 30-minute interview. And then like almost an hour in, the interviewer just straight up says, Kevin, you're just not the type to do homework. What do you think about homework? I'm like, I love homework. How do you answer that question? And then the next question was like, are you going to take your group projects seriously? I'm like, yeah, I mean, we have Skype, right? We could just, dial in, and then ended up getting rejected from that school. So it was so funny because no one thought I would ever go back to school. But I think at this age, like, I appreciate it so much more, only because, like, a school, like Chicago, they have a great, like, data analytics program. They have so much about machine learning. Like, you can take coding classes disguised in an MBA. So I figured, well, if I'm going to go to a school, I should go to a school that can really enhance my skill sets. And I think it was a good way to kind of like retool myself and almost have like maturity to kind of, just really focus and not just think that, oh yeah, I'm good at sales, I can do everything, which was kind of like my attitude when I was younger, and just kind of grow as a professional. So that's kind of the reason why I want to go back to school. And also, obviously, build a vertical network. So.